It all started with a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible creak that echoed through the house late at night. At first, Emma thought it was just her old wooden floors settling. After all, she had moved into the house barely a month ago, and it wasn't uncommon for older homes to make noises. But there was something about this sound that sent a chill racing down her spine. It felt alive. Have you ever felt like your house was watching you? Like it was holding its breath, waiting for you to notice something? That's how Emma felt every night as she climbed into bed. She would turn off the lights, lay down, and stare at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that the unease she felt was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. One night, as Emma sat on her couch scrolling through her phone, the creaking sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from the basement. She froze, her heart pounding so loudly that she could feel it in her ears. Her mind raced with possibilities: a loose pipe, a draft, maybe even a raccoon that had somehow gotten in. But why did it feel so deliberate? She grabbed her flashlight and tiptoed toward the basement door. The air grew colder as she approached, and her fingers trembled as she turned the knob. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, disappearing into an inky blackness that her flashlight struggled to pierce. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. Of course, there was no answer. She wasn't even sure what she expected. A reply? A whisper? Or maybe she didn't want an answer at all. Would you have gone down those stairs? Emma didn't want to, but she forced herself to move. Each step she took groaned under her weight, the sound echoing eerily. At the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight beam swept across the room. It was a typical basement: old boxes, a rusty water heater, and cobwebs dangling from the ceiling. But something felt wrong. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a strange smell, earthy and metallic. Emma's eyes landed on a small patch of dirt in the corner of the basement. Unlike the rest of the floor, which was concrete, this patch looked freshly dug. Her stomach twisted. Why would there be fresh dirt in a house that hadn't been lived in for years? She stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the uneven ground. As she crouched down, her fingers brushed something cold and hard sticking out of the dirt. Her breath hitched. Slowly, she dug around it with her hands until she unearthed what looked like a bone. A human bone. Panic surged through her. She stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The basement plunged into darkness. She scrambled to pick it up, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it again. When the light flickered back on, she gasped. The patch of dirt was now perfectly smooth, as if no one had ever touched it. Emma ran upstairs and locked the basement door behind her. Her mind raced with questions. Who was buried down there? How long had they been there? And why did it feel like the house didn't want her to find out? The next day, she called her best friend Claire. "You have to come over," Emma said. "There's something wrong with my house." Claire arrived that afternoon, skeptical but willing to listen. "Are you sure it wasn't just an old pipe or a piece of trash?" she asked as Emma recounted the previous night. "I know what I saw," Emma insisted, "and I'm not going back down there alone." Together, they ventured into the basement. Emma's heart pounded as she shone the flashlight on the patch of dirt. This time, the surface wasn't smooth. Instead, it looked like it had been disturbed again, with faint impressions of fingers or tools. Claire's face paled. "Okay, that's definitely not normal." They decided to dig. With a pair of gardening tools and gloves, they carefully unearthed what lay beneath. More bones appeared, along with tattered scraps of fabric that looked like they belonged to an old dress. The smell grew stronger, filling the basement with an overwhelming stench of decay. As they worked, Emma noticed something chilling. The deeper they dug, the colder the room became. Their breath puffed out in visible clouds, even though it was the middle of summer. And then they heard it, a soft, mournful wail that seemed to rise from the very walls of the house. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to stop," she said, dropping her tool. "We've disturbed something we shouldn't have." But Emma couldn't stop. She felt compelled to keep digging, as if the house itself was urging her on. Finally, they uncovered something horrifying. A skull, its empty eye sockets staring back at them. It looked ancient, but there was no mistaking that it was human. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered. The wailing grew louder, transforming into a guttural scream. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls dripping with a black, tar-like substance. Emma grabbed Claire's hand, and they bolted up the stairs. As they slammed the door shut behind them, the house fell eerily silent. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, clutching her phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would she say? That she had found bones in her basement and her house was screaming at her? Who would believe her? Instead, she turned to the internet. She searched for the history of the house, hoping to find some explanation. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a man named Samuel Hartley, who was accused of murdering several women. Though he was arrested, the bodies were never found. Rumor had it that he buried them somewhere on the property. Emma's hands shook as she scrolled through old newspaper articles. The dates matched the time period of the dress they had unearthed. And then she saw it, a photograph of Samuel Hartley. His cold, piercing eyes seemed to stare right at her. The next morning, Emma decided she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She packed a bag and planned to leave, but as she walked toward the front door, she felt a strange force pulling her back. The air grew thick, and she could hear faint whispers, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. "Don't leave," they seemed to say. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of the trance. It was Claire. "Emma, I did some research," she said, her voice frantic. "Whatever's in that house, it's not just ghosts. It's something darker. You need to get out of there now." Emma didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her keys and bolted out the door. But as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. In her rearview mirror, she thought she saw a shadowy figure standing in the window of the house, watching her leave. That night, Emma stayed at Claire's apartment. They discussed what to do next. Should we call the police? A priest? What if it follows me here? Emma asked, her voice shaking. Claire looked uneasy. "I think we need to go back. If we don't put whatever is in that house to rest, it might never leave you alone." The thought of returning to the house made Emma's stomach churn, but she knew Claire was right. The next day, they armed themselves with sage, salt, and anything else they could think of to protect themselves. As they stepped into the house, the air was colder than ever, and the whispers were louder, more insistent. In the basement, they lit the sage and sprinkled salt around the room. Emma's hands shook as she recited a prayer she had found online. The air seemed to grow heavier with every word, pressing down on them like a physical weight. And then, as if in defiance, the wailing returned, louder and more terrifying than before. The walls began to shake, and the black substance oozed from every crack. Emma and Claire held hands, refusing to back down. "Whoever you are," Emma shouted, "leave this place and find peace." The room erupted in chaos. Boxes flew across the room, and the lights exploded, plunging them into darkness. But just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The air grew still, and the whispers faded. When they turned their flashlights back on, the basement was empty. The bones, the black substance, even the patch of dirt, all of it was gone. Emma moved out of the house the next day, leaving it to whatever spirits still lingered. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders if she truly escaped. She swears she can still hear the faint creak of footsteps, following her wherever she goes. What would you do if this happened to you? Would you have the courage to face what's hidden beneath the surface? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Who knows? The next tale might be closer to home than you think.